Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I am the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at some AI terms. Now, the value in reviewing AI terms is because most artificial intelligence, if not all, I am not familiar with every single AI. It is a ever-evolving field, but most AI is going to process some type of personal data, which is why we're reviewing it today. These terms were last modified July 2025, and they applied to an individual's use of the AI-powered services. Now, I think one thing that's very interesting to note here is there's actually no specificity that this is for an individual. My presumption is that the tool is for an individual. Now, I don't know how an AI service would look like if it was targeted to a company, like company use. But generally, if you're going to be using any type of AI tool, the target is going to be an individual. It says here your, but there's no specificity on if your is a person or if your is a customer, like an entity, a legal entity. When we talk about personal data, we're looking at the data that identifies an individual. And actually, I want to go off on a bit of a tangent and talk about this. If your business provides services to an organization, and the only personal data that is required in order for you to do the business is the contact details related to your customer for one individual at the organization, your privacy practices are going to look very different to an entity that provides healthcare services to patients. The privacy laws dictate, one, what constitutes personal data. And then what I want to talk about from a US perspective is there are specific thresholds that have to be met on a state-by-state basis before an organization even needs to consider their obligations in that specific geography. For example, some US state privacy laws require that in order for a privacy law in that state to apply to a legal entity or business, they need to process the personal data of 100,000 residents within that state. So if you're a small business and you don't meet that threshold, then that privacy law doesn't apply to you. That being said, you need to take a look at things not just from a state level, but also an industry level and a federal level. There is federal privacy legislation that may apply to the products and services that you provide to your customers, individuals, etc., that you need to be cognizant of, particularly in the United States. Now, in other geographies, the outlook for privacy compliance is a lot more simple, but it's very complex in the US, and I think businesses should seek counsel to understand what's even applicable to them. In the event, one, it helps your business continue to grow. If you have good privacy practices and you ever are subject to an investigation, you already have all your ducks in a row, and then you're not spending time and energies and efforts remediating a situation that you could have avoided by being proactive. I don't want to get too much into that, but I think the use of our AI powered services, I don't know the services. They would have to give me insight if I was their counsel into what this constitutes so that I can understand the implications and whether this applies to individuals, which I'm pretty sure we'll see below. Okay, let's talk about this. The AI-powered services are product features accessible in the services offering AI capabilities, including but not limited to the features listed here. AI service providers are third-party service providers that we rely on to provide certain AI functionality. A list of the AI service providers are listed here. Now, I want to talk a bit about this because this is kind of similar to a subprocessor list. Subprocessor is generally an entity that allows a processor, and a processor is kind of synonymous with the term service provider in certain geographies, but essentially there's lots of different terminology depending on the geography where you process personal data. I'm just going to go with subprocessor for the purposes of this review. A subprocessor helps a service provider to carry out the service that they have contractually signed to give to you as a customer. That's the simplest way I think of putting it. Now, there's a lot of complexities. The term subcontractor differs from geography to geography. You need to be able to understand the terminology within your organization. But the reason I highlighted this is because it looks like there are additional service providers related to the AI functionality or services of this business that are being listed here. I wonder if this list is the same as the subprocessor list that is exclusive for the processing of personal data, or if it's separate. But I think that from a transparency perspective, it's really good that they've listed their third-party service providers so that when you as a business are doing your due diligence, you're able to understand where your data may go. I'm actually going to click it because I want to see something. I want to see if they put the geography there. I've talked a lot on this channel about geography. It's one of the most important questions that a privacy counsel is going to ask, because every geography has its own data protection law, and those have to be reviewed if you're going to be providing your products and services there. So if you are a US-based business and you offer your products and services only in the United States, you need to look at privacy from a federal, state, and industry level. If you are a US-based company and your products and services are offered in the Latin American region and in the Asia Pacific region, you're not only reviewing privacy legislation in the United States from the tiers I just mentioned above, you're also looking at the legislation in the Latin America regions and the Asia Pacific regions, because if you are processing personal data in those geographies, you may meet the thresholds there that apply to you, and you need to take those into consideration when you, one, build your privacy program, and two, how your business operates. So there was something specific I was looking for. Sometimes these lists of service providers will also have an additional column, and that additional column will talk about geographies where these service providers are effectively providing the service to this entity. The value in that is you as a business are able to make a determination whether the geographies where your data is going to be moved to is acceptable from a risk perspective for your own privacy compliance. When you use any AI-powered services or input customer content into any AI-powered services, you permit us to submit the customer content to an AI service provider. So this is really important. We just looked at the section that relates to the AI service providers. If you're going to permit this as a customer, it's something, one, you should know. So you should definitely be clicking on that link I just clicked on. And you should be asking questions to this entity. Where are those service providers located? Are they located in a geography that's restricted under certain executive orders in the United States? How is this going to implicate my business? You can't just sign any terms that are presented to you. You need to be able to understand them. And you need to be able to understand how they affect personal data, because your business cannot operate without personal data. Customer agrees and instructs that we may use customer content. I'm just going to scroll to the top because I didn't see a definition of what constitutes customer content. That would be really valuable. How does the customer know what this is if the terminology has not been defined? I think it's always valuable to have more definitions if you're going to use specific language that has not been addressed. Now, one thing I will say about this is maybe the definition of customer content exists in other documentation that is presented to the customer. It may not exist here, but if you're going to reference it here, let's say I'm a consumer, right? I'm a consumer that's reading these terms. I don't know what customer content is because I don't have the other documents that are associated with this business. So in order for me to be able to read this and understand this and also do my own due diligence, I need to know everything. Customer content hasn't been defined. It should be defined. Customer agrees and instructs that we may use customer content and outputs to develop and improve the features of the AI-powered services, both during and after the terms of the agreement, provided that the customer content and outputs will not be used to train any AI functionality of a third-party AI service provider and will not be shared with any other customer. So you need to see it within your business organization if this is acceptable to you. Now, there is a risk, right? If you use this tool, you're saying that they can develop and improve the features of the AI-powered services. This is why I think it's so crucial to have a definition of what constitutes customer content. Let me scroll up and see if it has been. No, it definitely has not been defined. So I think that the AI terms are very interesting. I will say that I don't know what the AI service looks like. As a privacy lawyer, I would be asking for technical specification documentation about what makes up the services, and then I would redraft this to reflect terminology that the customer might want to know, and then also making sure that they understand the risks associated with this provision specifically, because if they are going to be developing and improving the features, does that require them to process personal data related to the customer content? That would be of interest to me, one, as a privacy lawyer, to understand the risks for this business, and then two, the risks to the customer too, and is that something that the customer is willing to accept? Alright, I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have questions or comments about my opinion, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another review.